South China Morning Post, 9th of November 2022, the West should treat China like an enemy instead of a friend. Sometimes, it's even easier to deal with people you don't like than people you do. The most complicated people to deal with are enemies. The West doesn't know what to do with China because of this. Each country has its problems and goals when it comes to China. Because of this, they begin to fight with each other. China isn't leaving, though. You might want it to fall apart and its economy to crash. Not only would that be terrible for the Chinese, but it would also cause massive trouble for everyone else. It is better to have a China that is whole nationally and geographically than one that is broken up. To say that China is the enemy and that separation is the answer is much more accessible. But people who say it most likely know that it won't work. Almost every major country trades with China, some even do their most significant business there. This is because the world has invested much money in building China's industrial infrastructure. But Chinese goods are now too expensive, so it might be time to leave. A lot of things won't work on a global level without China's help. Climate change is the most apparent problem since China is one of the biggest polluters. How can you save the Earth if the biggest polluter isn't on board? It will never work to say, we will work together on this, but we will work together against that. Canada has been the quietest when dealing with China, even though it knows it has significant problems with the country. Of course, their relationship is complex, but so is everyone else's. Meanwhile, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau publicly said China meddled in his country's elections in 2019 and 2018. Even though his government and Canadian commentators are angry, they are not as outspoken as Americans have been about claims that Russia meddled in the 2016 presidential election. Since the arrest case of Huawei's number 2 executive, Meng Wanzhou, was over, Canada's exports to China have increased. And giving into Chinese hostage diplomacy, it will co-host COP15, the 15th meeting on biodiversity, with China in December. But it also told 3 Chinese companies not to do business with Canadian mining companies because it was unsafe for the country. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's coalition government partners were already going after him before he got to Beijing for his one-day trip. Many of his enemies seem to believe that decoupling is the answer, but it's clear that Scholz doesn't. China became Germany's biggest trade partner last year, making up 9.5% of all the goods that Germany went into and out of the country. The Kiel Institute for the World Economy said the previous year that Germany's real income would drop by 1.4%, which is equal to 48.4 billion euros, $48.5 billion US dollars. This is because Germany's economy would become sharply less connected to China. In the case of the European Union, this would mean that real income would drop by an average of 0.8%. Based on the 2019 GDP, this would mean a loss of 131.4 billion euros in actual revenue over the long run. But Germany is not as dependent on trade with China as South Korea, Japan, and Australia, which count on China for 20% to 30% of their work. Interestingly, advanced electronics are the area of Japan's trade with China that is growing the fastest. Tokyo Electron has a 90% market share for equipment used in unique and necessary chemical processes to make electronics. They also have a 40% market share for equipment used in another critical production process. Records from the company show that of the combined sales of about 2 trillion yen, $13.6 billion, for the fiscal year ending in March, a quarter of that went to China. This made China the most significant customer, far ahead of South Korea and Taiwan. The US now wants to stop these kinds of sales to China. Almost every country allied or partners with the US has strong economic, technological, and educational links with China. This includes the US itself. Cutting ties with and isolating China might make them safer, but it will surely make everyone weaker. The world needs to figure out how to live with each other at some point, no matter how much we hate each other because of China's bad luck. The other options are either not appealing or too terrible to think about, since if the world breaks away from China, billions of Chinese people will be thrown into poverty and civil war. This is unfair to the Chinese people because the Chinese Communist Party is really to blame.